In late 2024, I bought this 2017 Harley Davidson Sportster Roadster. Why? Well, it's a long story.
Neat.
While I do joke, and this motorcycle is definitely something of an impulse buy, the Sportster is hands down one of my favorite motorcycles ever made. If you asked me to point to one motorcycle that defines what it means to be an American bike, it's this thing right here. The thing is though, I didn't just buy this to go barg hopping with all the other brothers out there, and I definitely didn't buy it just to go cruising down a twisty road. I bought this thing specifically to take it to a racetrack. To which everybody out there said, dude, that's a really bad idea. And I said, and? What in my not inconsiderable body of work made you think that I was above a really bad idea? So I rode this thing for an entire year on several different racetracks, and this is what happened. When I bought this bike, it had 11,784 miles on the clock, and now it has 14,781 under its belt. Excluding a few hill country rides, which only amount to about 1,000 miles, this thing has spent every other mile between 4,500 RPM and redline across tracks in Texas, Oklahoma, and California. But before we talk about the track performance, I gotta show you something real quick. You see these shiny gold bastards right here? These are Öhlins shocks, and I'm the kind of idiot who would buy something like this because the name on the shock means performance, but I really didn't buy it simply because of the adjustability or the way it looked. I didn't even buy it because it's Öhlins. I bought it because of the length. You see, contrary to popular opinion, you really can't do much with 6 inches. Now that's a dick joke because my analytics on YouTube tell me those are good for engagement, but what's better for engagement than pissing off the entire Harley crowd so they can rage about it in the comments? If you're on a Harley and your rear fender is hugging your rear tire, you're doing it wrong. See, if you want your bike to actually be able to turn and you don't want a crack in the asphalt to rearrange your spine like a loose stack of pebbles, then the Ass Dragon Plumber Crack Show and Lowered look is the exact opposite of what you want. If you own a Sportster and your shock length is less than 13 inches, I dare you to try raising your rear end. If you decrease the rear ride height of your motorcycle, the front tire, which has a fixed angle, is thrown further forward. This means that your bike is heavier to tip in, it won't hold a line as well, and you reduce your ground clearance. Remember that last part because it's going to be critically important in a few minutes. But anyway, the solution was easy. Longer shocks. Kinda. You see, Roadsters already shipped with a 13-inch shock in the rear, which is why this is the best handling Sportster out there, XR1200s excluded. I needed more! You see, that's why I went with the Bung Kings lift kit on here, because this thing added an extra 3/4 of an inch, not to mention the extra half inch that I can get out of the Öhlins height adjustment. That means...
McMurray, have a 5.15-inch penis!
Not really, but what it does mean is that I, Spite, have a 14.25-inch ride height. The change was instant. Not only did the bike handle better, but it felt faster. I could attack a corner more aggressively and carry more speed. But that only brought out the next most annoying failure on this bike. The brakes. See, Harley Davidson never intended for this motorcycle to be used on a racetrack. Hell, they barely intended for it to see triple digits in the first place. But I'm an idiot, so I found myself riding a motorcycle that could not keep up with the paces it was going. The problem was twofold: a set of shitty stock calipers and a terrible master cylinder. Weirdly enough, Harley actually includes steel lines on this motorcycle from the factory, and the bike doesn't have ABS, so this would be a simple, albeit expensive fix. And let's talk about the calipers first. Most Harley Davidsons actually use very similar hardware, which means parts from one bike can fit on another. Turns out the V-Rod VR SCR street rod, like the one that we gave away last year, had dual discs up front and with Harley branded Brembo calipers. It also turns out that they directly bolt up to the front end on my Roadster. So Bob's your uncle, Brembo brakes, but we still have the master cylinder problem. If you have a good grip on your sanity and personal finances, this will be a slightly trickier fix. However, I don't suffer from that issue, so boom, Brembo RCS 19. Yup, that thing right there is the master cylinder that all the track rats recommend that you upgrade to, and as it turns out, they make a fitting for a 1-inch handlebar. So with a little bit of clever wiring and an aftermarket switch, now this bike will actually stop on a dime, so long as that dime is the size of a school bus. But still, this thing was officially ready to hit the racetrack. Circuit of the Americas, or COTA, is one of the toughest tracks on the planet. It was designed by Herman Tilke for Formula 1, which means it's particularly difficult for bikes. One of the coaches at Ride Smart, the track school that I ride with, likes to say that Tilke hated motorcyclists and wanted to kill them. Now, the second part might be a bit extreme, but that first part? Yeah, I'd buy that, but that's part of what makes it fun. Now, when I first showed up to COTA, I had a feeling that all these twisty bits here, those would actually be the hard parts, but boy oh boy was I wrong. As it turns out, turning on the Sportster is actually the easy part. And as per usual, I went to see my buddy Roger at On-Road Off-Road so that he could set up my shocks. By the way, he's at most Ride Smart track days, so even if you're not riding on the racetrack, he can set up your suspension if you're in the area.
The static, you should have around 10. You've got somewhere between 0 and 2. And with you on it, about 30-ish round number, and you're at 14. So it's off literally 100%. But other than that, it's perfect.
There we go, yeah. So the one thing that I changed, I fucked it up.
Well, I wasn't going to word it that way.
If you want to feel what your motorcycle actually is supposed to feel like, give him a visit. He's one of the best in the business. Doesn't pay me to say that, he's just really damn good. The bike is surprisingly stable. If I had to put that to one thing in particular, I'd say it's the weight. This is 568 pounds fully fueled, which means that it soaks up any bumps on the track like they're not even there. Turn 10 is a particularly bumpy turn, but even at 80 or 90 miles an hour, I barely noticed it. Now that stability does come at a cost. It's slow side to side. Not only is it heavy, but it comes stock with a 19-inch front end, which means it's very heavy to turn. Through the chicanes on COTA, basically turn 3 all the way up until turn 9, it's nothing but high-speed direction changes, and you really have to fight it to get it to change course. You can help that a lot by adding some body English, but that makes it even more physically demanding to ride. There's no getting around that you as a rider are working hard to make this thing go around a racetrack. But then there's the worst parts, the straights. Look, I'm not under some illusion that this bike is going to keep up with a leader bike or a 600 going down a kilometer-long back straight, but I wasn't expecting it to take almost 30 seconds apex to apex. Once you get into 5th gear, the bike has nothing left for you. It's done and you're just waiting for that braking marker. The plus side is I can outbrake every one of those leader bikes, at least in the intermediate group. But not because my brakes are so much better or my nerves are a lot stronger, but because my closing speed is so much slower. Now, any good track rat who heard that last sentence immediately thought to themselves, hey, that sounds an awful lot like riding a 400, and I thought that too. So what I did was I packed my crap up and decided to head to some friendlier ground. That would be Hallett Motor Racing Circuit up in Oklahoma.
My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard.
Hallett is easily one of my favorite racetracks I've ever been on, and I've been on like a whole 8 racetracks, so I really know what I'm talking about. If you get a chance, you really should give it a look-see. It's a 1.8 mile racetrack with a decent surface, 10 corners, and no one ever goes there. So you have a ton of free track to work with. On my second track day there were only 14 people on track with me in my group. The most important part is there aren't a bunch of long straightaways to worry about, and I rarely left 4th gear on this thing, which means I spent more of my time turning and accelerating, and a lot less time waiting for that next apex. That's when it all started to come together. I can't stress enough how important seat time is on your motorcycle. If you want to learn what your bike is actually like to ride, take it to a racetrack. I knew going into Hallett that I needed to carry more speed through the corners and focus on my exit, so that's exactly what I did. For 4 days across 2 weekends, I pushed myself and the bike harder and harder, and that's when I found its secret weapon: torque. The Roadster here makes 76 foot-pounds of torque at 3,500 RPM, and 80% of that torque is available from 2,800 RPM all the way up to 5,000 RPM where it starts to fall off. That means that unless you're riding a Super Duke, I have more torque available to me sooner than any inline 4, parallel twin, or triple you're gonna find on most racetracks. What that actually translates to in the real world is that with the right line and good drive, a CBR 1000 RR isn't actually ahead of me. He's in my way. I wasn't filming for the day I was behind the CBR 1000 RR, but on my filming laps, you can clearly see there's a white and a black bike in front of me. They have way more power under the hood, and they leave me in the dust on the straights, but 2 corners later, I'm right back on their tail, and they can hear my pistons slapping away while I'm breathing down their necks. Here's a bit of a humble brag and maybe a piece of advice to some sport bike guys on a short track. If you grid up next to a Harley, don't immediately write him off. He might be faster than your V4. Now, if you've been looking at this bike in the background of some of these shots and you've realized, hey, that bike looks wrong, like it's missing some stuff, you're right. It doesn't have an exhaust on it. It doesn't have a chain on it. It's got a completely different front end. It's a lot taller than it used to be, but that's because I'm going through an entire rebuild of this bike. We're gonna go over why in a minute, but one of the first mods that I put on this thing is actually this Chigee dashboard right here, which just bolts right up to the front end of this bike. This thing is a 6-inch touchscreen TFT display that has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto built in, along with a whole bunch of other features that are really handy if you're actually riding on a racetrack. First and foremost, this uses GPS, so you know exactly how fast you're going. On Harleys like this, you can also plug in their OBD scanner and send data directly from the bike to the dashboard so you can monitor it in real time. And lastly, this thing has built-in cameras, so if you don't want to mount a GoPro to your motorcycle, you can just run this and record your laps not only looking forward, but backwards as well. If that sounds interesting to you, click the link down in the description below and use the code SPICECORNER where you can get 10% off your order.
I got no shins.
What does a trashed boot, a ruined exhaust heat shield clamp, and a foot peg that looks like I went after it with an angle grinder all have in common? The ground. This is where we arrive at the biggest issue with the Sportster, and it's not the fact that this motor vibrates so much that the breather bolts back themselves out, letting motor oil spill all down my engine, the rest of my bike, my leg, and the guy behind me. It's not even the fact that riding this thing at redline for so long has made this motor start making some extra sounds that I'm not the biggest fan of. It's the ground clearance. The very second things start getting fun, you start dragging stuff on the ground, and that's a big issue. I just wish I didn't drive all the way out to California to find it out. Yep, when Alpine Stars dropped their SuperTech R7 helmet, they invited me to come try it out on a California racetrack. I figured that since I was driving all the way out there, I might as well bring one of my bikes for the fun of it, and instead of bringing my Super Duke or the XSR I was giving away at the time, I decided to drag my Sportster across the country to see how it would hold up. It started by having a dead battery, which is classic Harley, but after racing to an AutoZone to buy a jump pack, I was able to get out on the racetrack and see what was what. Streets of Willow is actually a lot like COTA, only smaller. It's a 1.6 mile track with some really fast sections, and a long straight if you line up the apexes right. It also has some really fast corners that lead into very sharp hairpins. We ran it counterclockwise, and while the rest of the regulars were griping about how they liked clockwise more, me and my no experience had a grand old time. The Hallett lessons worked. If you ride this thing like a 400, you can catch much faster motorcycles. A lot like this MT-09 SP right here.
Let's see if we can't catch this Yamaha here. And the answer is no, we cannot. but I'm definitely gonna try. Hey, we caught it!
Everything was going great until I looked at my boots, specifically my left boot, which had scraped straight through the metal toe slider and into the plastic beneath. See, originally I had bad foot position, letting the side of my boot touch down before my foot peg, but I since corrected that. Almost immediately, I started scraping my foot peg until that stopped and I started scraping my boot again. This time there wasn't really anything I could do because I had scraped enough of the foot peg away that now both my boot and the foot peg were scraping in equal measure. I figured that was just a funny quirk until I caught something on the right side of the bike, a warning sign that made me park the bike in the garage until I can fix it, and I still haven't deemed it safe to ride. See that right there? That is the bolt that holds this band clamp together, and it's completely trashed. But the bigger issue is actually this right here. That is a scrape mark on the can itself, which means that I was dragging the exhaust on the ground. See, the thing about the Sportster's exhaust is it actually sits to the side of the motor, not underneath it like on most sport bikes. It's also completely hard mounted, which means that if you start setting this thing down, you have a degree or two more before you start lifting the tires off the ground, and you've got yourself a whole bigger issue than some scuffed paint. I'd gotten so used to the sounds of things scraping on this bike that I was filtering out the last warning my bike could give me, and I was actually flirting with disaster. So obviously, this bike is too dangerous for you to ride it safely on a racetrack, right? I mean, you shouldn't even be riding it on the street. Harley Davidson, more like Harley Davidson, am I right? No, you could not be more wrong. People have come up with an infinite number of reasons for why the Sportster sucks, and for the most part, they're all wrong. The Sportster doesn't make enough power. Sure, it doesn't if you're riding on a racetrack like COTA, but if you're on a short track, this thing is faster out of a corner than a lot of modern leader bikes. The frame is deeply flawed, and that means that it can't turn. Wrong. Maybe there is some underlying issue that means that at race pace, it can't keep up with modern motorcycles. But with one mod, this thing handles plenty fine for me to go have fun on a racetrack at an intermediate pace. That doesn't mean that the bike doesn't have its issues. The boneheads who designed it thought more about looks than performance on the performance Sportster. So instead of 17s, they put a 19-inch front end on it to fill out the empty space between the wheel and the frame. Not only does it make it heavy to handle, it means finding sporty rubber is way harder than it should be. The stock brakes are woeful at anything other than driving Miss Daisy speeds, and need more grunt on both the caliper and the lever. The stock suspension is upside down, which is the right side up for sporty riding. Try to say that 5 times fast. But the bike comes with only preload in the rear, which means I'm very familiar with the feeling of this bike bottoming out into a corner and topping out of one. The seating position is also hilariously bad for sporty riding, and no one makes a seat that moves me where I need to go. But what I really want you to take away from this video is if you're out there riding around on a Sportster or an adventure bike or a touring motorcycle and you think that you need to go buy a completely new bike so that you can go ride on a racetrack, no. Take the bike you got and you're gonna have a great time. And honestly, you're gonna get a lot of props just for showing up from all the sport bike guys. They see nothing but fully fared sport bikes and naked bikes all the time, and they actually get a little bit excited when you show up on something weird. And better yet, the guys who got their heads screwed on straight get even more excited when you pass them on that weird bike. Contrary to what Reddit might tell you, the vast majority of people I've encountered at racetracks are awesome folks who are just happy to have you there. You may have to put up with a little bit of ribbing, like every time I go to the racetrack on my Sportster and Lord Tony, the old Scottish Ride Smart instructor, is there. He makes fun of me whenever we're doing lead follow laps. He's like, every time we get on the straight, I gotta lean back and put the kettle on while you're waiting for that next braking marker. But then once we get there, he's said that my lines are looking pretty good, and if the damn bike could get out of its own way, I'd be riding a little bit faster. Does the Sportster have its problems out on the racetrack? Absolutely, but this is hands down my favorite motorcycle I've ever ridden in anger on a racetrack. Throughout the last year, this stupid bike has been there supporting me while I become a better rider. And now it's time for me to support it while it becomes a better motorcycle.